Then let's begin. I have the privilege to open this launch of a toolkit that we really hope will be the support situation in regards to intersex asylum seekers and refugees. A decade ago, in 2013, when the Malta Declaration was created, the existence of intersex people was barely known in Europe and around the globe. A lot has changed since then, as a result of the tireless work of intersex activists and intersex organizations and their allies in Europe and around the globe. And this has led to developments that none of us would have believed to be possible. The visibility of intersex people and the human rights violations we face is growing, still slowly but steadily. But let's also be clear, despite the progress that we have seen, intersex persons and their existence are still very invisible in everyday life and among professionals in all Europe. Many professionals find it difficult to access information on the specific situation and needs of intersex persons that is relevant. Leads to impression among those professionals that they do not work with or do not provide services to any intersex person. And this situation aggravates in contexts where intersex persons are specifically vulnerable. Let me quote, "We have no intersex asylum seekers and refugees." This has been and still is a quite common phrase and opinion among professionals working in the area of asylum. This toolkit, the Intersex Asylum Seeker and Refugees Toolkit, aims to increase the amount and quality of the information and therefore support being made available to intersex refugees and asylum seekers, and to give professionals a tool at hand that sheds light on the specific challenges this part of the population faces. I will not add many more words except for how wonderful it is that we can launch this toolkit today. It is based on the expertise and work of many, of intersex asylum seekers and refugees and persons and organizations who some of these are themselves refugees, and we are more than grateful for the invaluable support that they've given to us. I also want to thank Luan Pertl, who initiated this project, and Jana Hugo, both co-authors of the toolkit, for all the thoughts and attention that they put into creating it, and Insa Krominger for the design and layout. Last but not least, our thanks go out to our cooperation partners, Heinrich Böll Foundation, and to the European Commission for their support. Now let's begin. First, the authors, Luan Pertl and Jana Hugo, will give you an overview of the toolkit's content and structure, followed by a panel discussion with a Q&A, which will address the situation of intersex asylum seekers and refugees from different angles. Thank you all very much for being here with us, and I give the floor to Luan and Jana.
Thank you very much, Dan, and also welcome from my side again. My name is Luan Pertl. I always like to say I'm a professional intersex human rights defender. This is what I like to say, and this is how I feel what I am. I'm also part of FIME, the intersex organization in Austria, and I'm a consultant on the Intersex Asylum Seeker and Refugee Project for OII Europe, and do a lot of other stuff too. And now I would like to introduce you to Jana Hugo.
Thank you, Luan, and thank you, Dan, for your opening speech, and also to everybody who's joining us. I'm Jana Hugo. I'm a policy officer at OII Europe. And yeah, for over 2 years now, I've been a proud intersex ally and working on the policy and advocacy side of things. And also for the last 2 years, almost since I started with Luan on this toolkit. So it's really a great privilege to be here with you. And I will pass the ball back to Luan to speaking a little bit about how all of this started. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, how everything started. I would say it's like I have been supporting asylum seekers and refugees for many years now. Before in Austria with the organization Queerbase, and now since a few years here in Berlin. And in this work, after a time, I really saw the need to create a document which gives information on intersex asylum seekers and refugees as I always heard from organizations and authorities, like Dan said before, there are no, we don't have any intersex asylum seekers and refugees, and we don't have enough knowledge on this topic. So years back, it started with the idea of a flyer. I actually don't know if you remember, Dan. And at one point we said like, okay, maybe it will be not a flyer, maybe it will be a toolkit. And now it's a 59-page long toolkit, what is really amazing. And actually, I just can't believe that we are launching it today. I also want to thank some people. First of all, I want to thank OII Europe and especially Dan Christian Ghattas, who supported this idea from the beginning. Of course, my co-author Jana Hugo. Without her, this would have not been possible. Petra Sussner for her legal advice and proofreading. Irene Chen for proofreading and feedback. Again, our funder, HBS and the EU. But most importantly, I want to thank all intersex people who trusted Jana and me and shared their experience and their expertise. Without that, we wouldn't have been possible to write this toolkit. And we are very, very grateful that all of you trusted in us to create a good document.
Thank you, Luan. So as we've heard, the work to arrive here today has been ongoing for quite some time. So it makes us very happy to be able to publish a toolkit and also have this launch event with all of you online. For you all to know that we will launch the toolkit online on the OII Europe website during the webinar. And once it's been launched, we will publish the link in the chat so you can all already take a look. But of course, also make sure we're listening to our wonderful panelists. But yeah, I mean, I know we hear this often, but intersex people and their stories are still really invisibilized, and there's really still not enough space for people to share their experiences and tell their stories. And I think that's really what Luan's vision initially, and also now that we've written the toolkit, hopefully achieves, is to really make a space for people to speak about their experiences, and specifically speaking about what it means to be both an intersex person and also somebody who is an intersex asylum seeker and a refugee, really speaking about their intersecting experiences and their compounding identities, because even then people can have very different experiences based on where they come from and what their lives have looked like. So hopefully we'll be able to close some information gaps already in sharing with you what we've included in the toolkit, and we'll give you some overviews of what you can expect to read.
So what you can expect to read. So with this toolkit, we wanted to close this gap that authorities always say we don't have enough information on it, on intersex asylum seekers and refugees. So yeah, we want to close this gap. We want to share the experiences of intersex people who have gone through the asylum procedure and show that there are actually many intersex people who already have this experience. Our goal is to provide a comprehensive list of recommendations for a range of professionals. So whether it is for organizations working directly with refugees on migration and asylum issues, for LGBTIQ organizations who also work on the topic intersex, but also on the topic asylum seekers, of course for asylum authorities, but also for social workers and other social actors who may accompany or come into contact with intersex refugees and asylum seekers. But also, of course, we want to share this toolkit with our intersex community, like with so many intersex organizations in Europe, who of course have the knowledge on intersex issues, but maybe don't have the knowledge on asylum seekers and refugees. Like we start with the toolkit we touch on basic concepts. Concepts like who are intersex people, what SOGS grounds are, and how relevant they are, and especially in that case with asylum, seeking for asylum. But then also we have the topic, what's the difference between a refugee and asylum seeker, especially for people who maybe don't have already so much knowledge on asylum procedures.
And then in the toolkit, we also thought that before we go into the nitty-gritty and more interesting bits, that maybe it would be important to include a section on the legal framework, especially as Luan mentioned, because we really wanted the toolkit to be accessible to people who don't necessarily work specifically on the topic of migration and asylum. So whether this is an intersex-led organization who's starting to work with intersex refugees and asylum seekers. So, and even then, for people who work on the topic, there's still so much invisibility. So we wanted to look at the legal framework and what's in it and how it can be applied to intersex people and their situation. So we look at both the international and the EU legal frameworks, and we also look at some soft law instruments, so not only hard law. And to give you an example, at the international level, we look a little bit at the Geneva Convention and the UNHCR Guidelines for International Protection number 9 that was developed in 2012. And at EU level, we look at the 4 key EU directives and how they are applied to the common European asylum system, specifically to the situation of intersex refugees and asylum seekers. And then the toolkit contains 3 main sections. In the first section, we really wanted to go into the details of what kinds of barriers and challenges intersex people may face at the various moments of their asylum journey, if we can call it that, starting from the forms of persecution they may face in their country of origin and the barriers they face there, as well as those challenges that continue when they embark on a journey to maybe leave their home country and being in transit, as well as the challenges that they continue to face when they arrive at the EU borders and throughout the arrival procedure. And here, to give an example, we speak about issues related to translation and interpretation, as well as terminology, because of course people identify and self-name in very different ways, and we know that this is one of the main challenges that intersex people can face. We also speak about the correct assessment and identification of vulnerabilities. We speak about the specific situation of intersex minors. We pay attention to the question of housing and reception conditions. And we also look at barriers that continue past the phase that we've decided to call integration. So once an asylum decision has already been taken and the intersex person is granted asylum, there are certainly many more challenges that can continue, and it doesn't just end at this moment there. So we look at family reunification, accessing healthcare, accessing legal gender recognition where possible, and also accessing psychological support. But I think these are quite some topics that we'll delve into in the panel discussion. So I'll leave that to our wonderful panelists to expand on. And then in section 2 of the toolkit is where we really focused on issuing concrete recommendations to the reader. So we follow the same logic as we did in section 1. We look at the arrival process and recommendations we can issue there. We look at assessment of the asylum application and recommendations for there, and as well the same counts for the integration process. And we look at recommendations in supporting intersex people to access safe housing, how to support them to meet their immediate care needs, the provision of comprehensive information, peer support, and especially we look at recommendations on how to support intersex people when they are navigating bureaucratic processes in a country they've just arrived in a country they may not speak the language of, during this phase where they're settling into their new home. How can we best support them? And then in the final section of the toolkit, We've highlighted some good practice examples that we've come across and that we really want to showcase to show that there is progress being made. It is a little bit unfortunate that when Luan and I were doing research, it was a bit more hard to come by good practice examples. But already in the time that we've worked on and finalized the toolkit, we've already learned of some more good practice examples. And so we're really hopeful that not only as a result of the publication of the toolkit, but as the movement grows and as awareness is raised about the situation of intersex people, that if we were to revise the toolkit in 5 years, we'd have even more good practice examples to include. But to give an example, we look at topics like housing, training, legal advice and educational material. And then we also look at funding, of course, which is, you know, something we can never not think about. And then Luan, if you want to share some more.
Yes. So what we decided also to add is like we add an Annex 1 and an Annex 2. So Annex 2 is actually some intersex-led organizations who already work on the topic of intersex asylum seekers and refugees, and also a short overview about like a little closer. So now let us come to Annex 1. What was a very difficult decision for us because we decided to list intersex-related diagnoses. What normally OII Europe and a lot of human rights-based intersex organizations are not doing. So it was a really, really long and very difficult discussion we had, Jana and myself, and then also with Dan, and in the end also supported us. Shall we do that? Shall we really do that? But as we see or have seen that there are so many intersex asylum seekers from different countries who are maybe do not know the word intersex or do not know the word variation of sex characteristics, but they maybe got a diagnosis. So if they have a diagnosis and you as people who are working with these asylum seekers don't know that this diagnosis is actually a variation of sex characteristics, then you don't know that, yeah, in front of you is sitting an intersex person. So this is why we decided to do that. As I said, it was a difficult decision, but we do think that in this case, it is such important information. And now, Jana, I give it.
Thank you, Luan. And I mean, yeah, I know that, and I hope that this information will serve to help people be correctly identified, even if from a human rights-based perspective, we of course oppose pathologization of intersex people. But yes, now it's time to move on to the panel discussion, and our panelists will shed some more light on various key topics and challenges and experiences. And I'd like to firstly introduce our wonderful moderator, Magda Rakita. Magda is an intersex activist, coach, and crisis consultant, and Magda has a background in economics and had a very wonderful career and successful career in finance, but now Magda focuses on building support networks for intersex people, as well as engaging in advocacy for intersex human rights. Magda is the co-chair of OII Europe and the co-founder of Fundacja Interakcja, which is the first intersex organization in Poland, as well as the co-founder of Interconnected UK. And Magda's work focuses on building support networks for intersex people, as well as advocacy for intersex human rights. I'd also like to introduce our panelists. We have Julius Kaggwa. Julius is a first-generation African intersex activist who has contributed to intersex visibility and movement building in Africa since the early 2000s, and has been at the forefront of African intersex leadership development, which led the collective action which formed the Africa Intersex Movement and the subsequent sub-regional organizing. His passion is to see a world where every human being is treated with dignity and without discrimination on any basis. Then we have Artem Lapov, who is a Russian intersex activist who had to leave the country because of persecution by authorities. Now Artem is living in France, trying to understand the needs and requirements of the intersex community, as well as studying the legal framework. Then we have Dr. Pertl Sussner, who is a lawyer and academic at the Humboldt University in Berlin in legal gender studies. And Pertl focuses on public law, human rights, and interdisciplinary legal research. Dr. Sussner's research areas encompassed forced migration and the climate crisis. And then we have Georgia Arapidou, who is the Senior Vulnerability Officer at EUAA, which is the European Asylum Agency. And prior to that, she worked with UNHCR, UNICEF, and for Greek civil society organizations at the Asylum Appeals Authority in Greece. She studied law and human rights law and has a focus and interest on refugee law and more precisely on the topics of child protection and gender-related issues. It's really lovely to have you all with us. I'd also like to introduce, well, hopefully many of you already know, Irene Kuzemko, who will be acting as our wonderful in-house interpreter and translator for Artem. Thank you so much, Irene, for having your hands on multiple things today. And thank you as always for doing interpretation for us. But now I will hand over to Magda and our panelists. Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jana, for wonderful introduction. I just want to say very quickly that I'm extremely honored and excited to be here and be a moderator of this panel discussion. But also I want to say that I'm super excited to see this work being published. As you mentioned, I'm from Poland, and in the recent years, in the last 2 years, the situation in Poland also have changed. And this is the area which I would never thought we would be involved to supporting refugees, for example. But that became our reality suddenly. And I wish that sort of toolkit was available sooner. That would definitely make some, figuring out pathworks much easier. But I would like to really concentrate on our wonderful panelists. And I think it would be great to start with you, Julius, if that's okay. You have such a huge, many of you probably know Julius from his many roles and many years of experience working in intersex movement globally. And you, Julius, have such an in-depth knowledge of the intersex movement and similarities in differences of challenges and experiences of intersex people in different regions of the world. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us some of that knowledge about challenges of intersex people and their loved ones when it comes to seeking refugee status in other countries.
Thanks, Magda. And hello, everyone. I think I'll start by saying that intersex people, just like most other minorities in all regions of the world, face discrimination and abuse solely on the basis of who they are or who we are. And sometimes in some regions due to their association with target groups, such as in the context of most intersex people's experience connection to or association with LGBTIQ communities. So while generally not so many intersex people have the opportunity to flee the risks they face, those who manage to do so flee their home countries and seek protection abroad. What is unique, what I would like to share that is unique about the threats that intersex people face in my experience and in the experience of many people that I have known, is that the challenges are bidirectional and have many layers. The threats start right after birth, and at that time they target the intersex child and the child's family. When such, say the mother or the parents of that child need to take that child out of danger, it will be a family affair at that point. It is usually at that point, it's the threat of non-consensual surgery or other intervention to try and fix the child, and the incredible harm that these surgeries and interventions have brought to intersex people all over the world, especially in the global north, where dangerous medical practices are rampant. And in some parts of the world, like in Africa, where I come from, where mutilation or even infanticide has been normal practice to try and deal with an intersex birth. So often it is physical violence from the communities where the intersex people live or the mothers of intersex children live. And, the kind of first call is to move from these communities probably and find safety in other communities. But when that is not safe enough, then the journey, there is need to cross borders. And these threats evolve at every stage of the intersex person's journey, from my experience. And from adolescence to adulthood, you come across threats from school environments, from social culture and government systems, from work environments, from medical establishments, from just the absence of legal protections. All of these contribute to why intersex people are eventually forced to leave their countries to seek asylum in other countries. However, due to, like I mentioned, due to the familial nature of these threats, it is always very challenging for intersex people to flee the risks they face, as they would rather flee together with their families, unless the risk comes from those families, which is sometimes the case. And for those who finally flee, almost all of them are still under a continuous threat of human rights abuses due to discriminatory laws and hostile societal attitudes in the countries of asylum. And now one would imagine that once an intersex person has arrived in a country of asylum, then all is well, there is safety, and this is the end of the story. But, sadly, that is not the case. From my experience, from just even writing support letters to other colleagues, there's both in the first and resettlement countries of refuge, there are challenges. These risks are worsened by lengthy and extremely traumatic case processing structures, which are also in many cases discriminatory and harmful to mental health, to the mental health of intersex people, and consequently to their general health and ability to thrive. Once that process has started and people have left, they're in a new country, their feelings, most of the challenges, like the really, really deep challenges, are feelings of loneliness and loss of social support network, extreme stress from social isolation. There's even deep isolation, for intersex refugees of color, when they find themselves in the thick of challenges at the intersection of race, sexual characteristics, and refugee status. Sometimes for intersex asylum seekers from Arabic countries, there is also an intersection of religion, their sexual characteristics, and then their refugee status, especially if they are Muslim. So yeah, there's loss of social status and the discrimination and mistrust that comes with it. This mistrust is in the case of is in the form of discrimination. Actually, it's a form of discrimination, and is exceptionally traumatizing, as it is always, most of the time, from local communities in countries of refuge, which communities have negative biases of the refugees. You will see this in landlords refusing to rent out their houses or apartments to refugees, banks not willing to open bank accounts for refugees. And when you're an intersex refugee, many people have not even heard of that word, intersex. And there's a lot of explaining to do. If people have this trauma as an intersex person, and then they find themselves with this mistrust, shop attendants following people around they suspect to be refugees as they move through shops or supermarkets, extremely lengthy processing times for asylum cases, because stories are not believed or stories are impossible to evidence. For example, for intersex asylum seekers, it's so difficult to provide evidence of what these threats look like. Yeah, I don't know if I have more time, Magda, but I can stop there and then probably supplement that later on if there are questions, specific questions to specific challenges.
Thank you so much, Julius. I think it's best maybe to leave it for now because we have limited time, and then I'm sure there will be questions, so we can touch up all the things. But thank you so much for sharing that. This is very much appreciated. And now I would like to move to Artem, if that's okay. And actually, you, Julius, spoke a little bit about this, and I want to move to that because very often we talking about this focusing on the process of moving to another country, sometimes in very dangerous ways, but also, you know, on the process of getting asylum. But this is not the end of the story, and you already touched on that. So I want to ask Artem about his thoughts about challenges that people face who are suddenly sometimes involuntarily relocated to another country, and they're intersex and they have to find their way. We know that even in our own countries, very often access to appropriate medical care is difficult. How we navigate that in the new countries when we don't understand the culture setting, very often we don't speak the language and so on. I mean, I would appreciate some thoughts, Artem, if that's possible.
Перевести тебе вопрос или понятно?
Понятен вопрос. Я думаю, что, конечно, если мы говорим о всем, что связано вне процесса получения убежища, то это основные проблемы, это, разумеется, финансы, да, и в том числе, где жить. Потом это здоровье и также другие административные процедуры.
When I think about the challenges, talking about the process of getting the asylum itself, the main problems are definitely the funds, which also includes your living situation and also your health and other spendings that are vital.
Можно начать, наверное, с работы, да, то есть первое, что было очень сложно понять, это так как эвакуация была лично для меня неожиданной, то это кем работать в новой стране. И здесь было очень много вопросов по поводу того, признается диплом или нет, признается опыт работы или нет, признается уровень образования или нет.
I may start talking about the job. And obviously, because me leaving my country, it was not something that was planned. In the new country, I was faced with a lot of challenges regarding the job. Which field should I work at? Will my university diploma still apply and be recognized in the new country? Will my work experience and work title still apply and be working in the new country?
Ну и в дальнейшем можно сказать о том, что было очень много вопросов, то есть кем стать, да, то есть какие есть возможности в новой стране учиться, работать, с какого момента я могу учиться, работать, как пройти все эти процедуры, чтобы стать полноценным членом общества.
And obviously there was a lot of questions regarding who should I be? Should I study? Should I work? In what field? When I am allowed to do those things? How should I proceed? What are all the legal parts of all of this process? How do I do all of this?
И когда решаются все эти вопросы, да, то встают вопросы также, например, о здоровье, о месте проживания. И вот у меня здесь небольшое уточнение про все, что касается медицины, тоже в этом вопросе, да, ответить, рассказать про свой опыт или потом будет?
Magda, should Artem also include the topic of health in the answer already or something later?
It's up to Artem really what he feels comfortable to talk about now. We have a couple of more minutes. I'm also wondering if there is something what he thinks was particularly helpful and maybe a recommendation for other people in any area of life.
Хорошо. Тогда можно сказать, что если вот, например, вопрос с работой, с учебой, да, как-то он более-менее решается, параллельно также нужно решать вопрос со здоровьем. Особенно, ну, это важно, разумеется, для интерсекс людей. И здесь очень сложно разобраться в новой стране, в совершенно другой системе, когда есть какие-то страховки, что-то бесплатно, что-то не бесплатно, нужны какие-то документы.
After you have figured out, hopefully, the question with your asylum and your living place, then obviously you have the question of health and healthcare. And obviously, you need to figure out a completely new system in a new country, figure out all the insurance process, figure out the things, some of which are covered for you, which ones are not covered for you. And it can also be especially important for intersex people trying to figure all of this out.
И если, например, говорить про лично мой опыт и систему во Франции, то по факту можно запросить страховку только через 3 месяца проживания и получить уже документ, с которым пойти к врачу, еще примерно через 2. То есть всем людям, которым нужна помощь постоянная, которые принимают постоянно какие-то лекарства, нужно держать в голове то, что во Франции, я думаю, и в других странах примерно такая же ситуация. Вот эту регулярную помощь, регулярные медикаменты, может быть какой-то перерыв. То есть, например, нужно взять с собой таблетки. Поэтому важно, я уверен, что вы в пособии это указали, то есть это важное такое предупреждение.
Talking about my own experience, in France, you can only apply for a medical insurance only after 3 months of living there, and then you will receive it after 2 more months. So if you are a person that is regularly taking any medication that is prescribed to you, this is something that you should keep in mind, and hopefully you brought those medicines with you in advance from your own country. I'm sure it's mentioned in the toolkit, but yeah, this is something, it's obviously different in different countries, but this is something to keep in mind.
И также еще, что я хотел бы отметить здесь вот именно в ответе на этот вопрос, это то, что также еще очень сложно в стране понять саму систему всего вообще государственного устройства, то есть куда можно пойти обратиться, где можно получить какую-то помощь, вообще любую, например, по тем же документам. И если, например, отказывают или каким-то образом дискриминируют, то куда можно пожаловаться? Тоже является такой сложностью, то есть незнание самой вот системы организации государств.
Another large issue I wanted to mention is in a new country, not understanding the entire structure of administration and the government. And whenever you need some kind of document, knowing where to go, or if your application is rejected or you experience any kind of discrimination, again, not knowing the process of how do you appeal this, how do you send a complaint, where do you go, all of this is also confusing and a challenge.
И, ну, чтобы завершить ответ на вопрос, ну, во-первых, разумеется, что это может стать основанием для какой-то дискриминации. Ну, в частности, я сталкивался с тем, что если есть какой-то языковой барьер или просто, то есть не знаешь, куда пожаловаться, то ну, просто остаешься незащищенным.
And obviously, in my experience, this can be sort of a reason, a ground for discrimination, whether there is any kind of language barrier or when you don't know where to appeal something, you know, it becomes you're basically just left alone and can be discriminated.
И получается, что первое время у беженцев, ну, я думаю, мой опыт тут релевантен вообще, наверное, всех, когда ты решаешь вот эти мелкие, казалось бы, вопросы с образованием, здоровьем, с работой, с жильем, с финансами, с вот этими административными вещами, получается, что ты как будто бы работаешь 8 часов каждый день с вот этой бюрократической машиной. И как бы тоже это нужно понимать, что не всегда, например, есть возможность делать что-то еще.
So when you are busy working on solving all of these issues regarding your asylum, your place to live, your job, your health, your studies, it's basically a full-time job that basically, yeah, we have to understand that sometimes dealing with all this bureaucracy, it just doesn't leave you time for anything else.
Спасибо за перевод.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for the translation. Спасибо тебе.
Спасибо большое, Artem. And thank you so much, Irene, for translation.
My
as well.
pleasure.
It's really, really helpful. Thank you. Oh, yeah, hearts. I just want to take this opportunity because we have two other experts on the panel. So I want to move on also to hear their perspectives and ask about this situation, discuss the topic from a bit different angle as well. And I would like to ask you, Pez, question, because you have the great expertise in the legal regulations around the subject we are discussing. So could you tell us a little bit about legal frameworks which are already in place, or what should be in place with aim of supporting intersex people and their loved ones?
Yeah, well, this is a fundamental and a very good question. Essentially, for LGBTIQ refugees, and especially for intersex refugees, what we call law on the books and law on action diverge significantly. Those affected theoretically have way more rights than are practically accessible to them. And this gap is expected to widen with the upcoming reform of the Common European Asylum System. And I would say that's one of the reasons why your toolkit, Luan and Jana, is such an exceptional and important work. And I'm honored to have been able to provide some legal support. Now, maybe for the gap between law on the books and law in action. What do I mean and what am I actually advocating for in my work? First, regarding the level of rights, law on the books. According to the refugee definition of the Geneva Convention, as it is implemented by the EU qualification directives, states must protect those at risk of persecution due to belonging to a particular social group. And since the 1980s, and certainly by the early 2000s, with the UNHCR guideline number 1, it has been clear that gender is included in this protection. And most importantly, the term gender here does not just refer to normative cisgender, endogender, binary systems. It is based on an understanding that sees gender as a social and cultural construct. This shows, for example, in the reference to trans rights in the UNHCR guidelines number 1 from the year 2000. And since the 2000s, the qualification directive in Article 10 specifies that gender identity is also a special case of the social group. On the other hand, of course, gender and sexuality are broad terms that do not correspond to the nuanced terminologies of Georgia Carta +10 principles, and you have mentioned them. However, I still want to argue against underestimating their potential, the potential of the broad terms, and advocate for not overlooking them. Gender is a very established ground for persecution, meaning we have a vast international and national repository on the rights of the persecuted, summarized, for example, in the UNHCR Guidelines number 9, or the documents, of course, of the EUAA. And according to the prevailing definitions, gender can often be utilized for intersex refugees. To overlook this, and to overlook the reference to gender as such, also means to take a step back in terms of human rights. At the same time, and now law in the action. At the same time, the demand for explicit visibility for LGBTIQ refugees, and especially for intersex refugees, is tremendously important. Dan, you have mentioned it in the beginning when you were saying, we have no intersex asylum seekers here, is such a common phrase. So obviously we have a problem here, a huge problem. And the toolkit is probably a first huge step towards a solution. Because the lack of visibility means that the rights intersex refugees actually have are harder to access. And this in a system that is already geared towards exclusion and a deprivation of rights. So, law in action. It starts with the procedure. Many intersex refugees, as you said, use pathologizing languages for themselves, of course. And they do unconsciously or consciously not associate themselves with an intersex community or queer community or whatever. And of course, LGBTIQ, sexual orientation, gender identity also refer to Western concepts that dominate refugee law, obviously, but not our realities, and certainly not the realities of those who are not raised within these Western concepts. So, intersex asylum seekers often have to learn a new vocabulary to be recognized, and this under already massively difficult psychosocial conditions. Often, they are living in gender binary violent environments. This leads them to confront state authorities who often know little about gender themselves. State authorities might not differentiate clearly between inter and trans. And probably they are not alert when someone talks about, I don't know, a hormonal problem. So I can understand the difficulties that you were mentioning about sharing diagnosis. And I can understand this was really a hard step, but I think it's very helpful in that case. Because otherwise, if intersex refugees are not recognized and not seen, usually their refugee status is not recognized. Often only subsidiary protection is granted, which is very common in the area of medical problems. Another result is accommodation in binary facilities, overlooking vulnerability in the process. Against their rights, against the rights they have in terms of law on the books. And I think this will worsen with the reform now. So far for now, if there are questions, I'm here.
That's so great, Pez. Thank you so much for sharing that, such an important angle to understand this a little bit better from different perspective. In sake of time, I would just ask you, I would like to move to Georgia now. Georgia, you are the Senior Vulnerability Officer at European Union agency for asylum. And I'm wondering if you could tell us more about products which agency has developed already to fill in the knowledge gaps about intersex asylum seekers over last years, or if they're making any positive feedback, or is the agency planning some more materials to put them out?
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Thank you also for the invitation, and congratulations on this new toolkit. It's going to be extremely helpful for the asylum and reception officers. So with regard to the European Union Agency for Asylum, among other aspects of the mandate, just to give a very brief, for a few seconds, a brief introduction to be able to respond to the question on the tools and guides. We are supporting EU and associate countries in identifying, assessing, and responding to the needs of asylum applicants who might be in a situation of vulnerability. So amongst them are intersex and LGBTIQ applicants. So we are basically doing this by promoting cooperation and information sharing among the authorities and other stakeholders, including NGOs. We work very closely with non-governmental organizations and academia. And we also develop relevant guides and tools, or we develop and deliver thematic training modules. So with regard to intersex applicants, we have published a key findings report on national practices and national guidance in relation to the asylum procedure for SOGISC-based claims. Which of course includes also considerations and practices with regard to the treatment of and the examination and assessment of intersex claims made by intersex applicants, and which to our knowledge and evaluation processes that we conduct very often, we know that many asylum authorities and case or individual asylum case officers identify good practices from other member states, and they duplicate them or they implement them in their own context, in their everyday work. Furthermore, we have a country of origin information research guide on LGBTIQ applicants. This is targeting asylum case workers or legal aid providers, judges, also, that they conduct country of origin information research on issues pertaining to SOGISC. This one in particular has been, it is a second edition because it was very successful and very useful to case officers, asylum case officers. And there was a request to focus, to explore on more issues. So we created the second edition. And also one part of the request was to focus a bit more on intersex applicants. So the second edition includes more information on how to conduct research information on country of origin information on intersex applicants. With regard to training, we have also developed and delivered two explicit training modules. One that is called Applicants with Diverse SOGISC, and the other that is a bit more generic on gender, both for asylum and reception officers. So they include issues like starting from more theoretical or issues that have to do with the definition, the specific characteristics of intersex applicants, how to identify, assess, and respond to their needs, but also how to address bias, social norms, etc. And besides those two trainings, a bit of more. These are two quite new trainings, so we have around a bit of more or less than 100 officers trained, but we also have a wider range of thematic training modules that make reference to intersex applicants, among other issues like interviewing vulnerable applicants, or the module called Reception of Vulnerable Persons. And these modules are very helpful for asylum and reception officers to build their capacity in understanding what are the intersex applicants. As it was mentioned before, for example, some people do not know the difference between intersex and trans persons. So these are very helpful, and we receive very very good feedback after the delivery. Additionally, we have tools that are not exclusive on intersex or LGBTIQ applicants, but they make extensive references, like the identification of special needs tool and the special needs and vulnerability assessment tools. Those include considerations, indicators, and guidance in relation to LGBTIQ applicants. Several asylum and reception administrations in the EU have been using those tools, so they get more. They increase their capacity in identifying and responding to their needs. Finally, from the developed products, we have a very comprehensive portal that's called Let's Speak Asylum. It has to do with information provision in an asylum context. It also includes specific considerations and practical examples on how to be inclusive of LGBTIQ applicants and the groups falling under this umbrella in the info provision activities and strategies in asylum and reception. It also includes illustrations, good examples of visuals and communication strategies. And finally, as you mentioned also, Magda, in the pipeline, we have a comprehensive guide on applicants with diverse SOGISC, which will cover the whole asylum and reception spectrum. And will address a wider target audience, including policymakers, managers, and staff working in the field, which is also expected to be published within this year, and it will be more straightforward with direct recommendations and guidelines. I hope I covered, and I'm here to answer any questions.
That's a lot. It's actually very impressive to hear that, Georgia. I would love to ask you also one quick question about challenges which are still identified by the agency in terms of intersex people, which you want to address in the near future. Besides that, thank you mentioned in the pipeline.
Yes, of course. Thank you for this question. I think that it was also, I would agree with the challenges that were already mentioned by other panelists. One of them, of course, has to do with limited knowledge and capacity of people that are dealing directly with applicants about the intersex-related from issues related to the terms, concepts, and particular needs of this group of applicants when it comes to health, for example, or when it comes to allocation of accommodation, the rooted norms that are about or prejudice and bias against this group. All this limited knowledge and capacity. To overcome those challenges, of course, we are trying to foster the capacity building activities that may be like tools and guides, as I mentioned, or training modules, or even promote some more targeted approaches like coaching or assignment of SOGISC experts in specific locations. And then I would also mention issues related to limited time-related constraints in the asylum pathway and in the reception, because the staff might not be able to create and establish safe spaces for applicants so that they open up and disclose their needs. So we are also trying to support to the extent possible for the EUAA, the authorities to allow more time, more space and resources, and more dedicated staff to establish some safe report for applicants to self-identify. And of course, what was also mentioned before about the overcrowding of several reception facilities and centers. Again, this also have the same negative effect because it hinders the work of the reception staff to deal with in the correct manner with the needs of LGBTIQ applicants, especially when very fast and timely and appropriate responses are required. When there is a need for immediate transfer of intersex applicants that are under a risk of attack, or you need to safe reallocate them safely reallocate them because of danger. And reception authorities, of course, can invest more in the application of the risk mitigation, in the application of safety measures, and in basically also identifying some housing alternatives for people at risk which includes intersex applicants, of course, under certain conditions. And we also support, try to support this way, both hands-on with operations that we have. So we support hands-on the countries in delivering reception conditions, or indirectly through the development of good tools and guides that help the reception staff to identify persons with special needs in a timely manner.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Georgia. That's really informative.
Thank you.
We actually have some questions, very interesting question also in our Q&A chat. I don't know how to call this thing, provided by Zoom. So I'm going to go back maybe, and I'll allow Jana and Luan to facilitate that and maybe answer some of the questions themselves. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone and your wonderful participation.
Yes, so this is now a good question. I don't know if everybody sees the question, but we had a question on, we had a question on how we going to work with asylum seekers and refugees who do not speak English or other European language, and or how we're going to work with different refugee human rights organizations in Europe to support intersex asylum seekers and refugees by providing lawyers, mental, medical, and social support. So to answer this question is, so actually this toolkit is coming from the side that I personally supported a lot of intersex asylum seekers and refugees in their asylum process, also in the interviews, preparing them for interviews, but also going with them to doctors, to looking for them to be able to get therapy or other needed things. So for me, it's very important to also provide that information with giving other people workshops on this toolkit. So for the first step will be to give workshops to intersex organizations on this toolkit, to explain them more on what are the needs, what you need to take care of when a person is in the asylum process, what kind of peer support needs a person, of peer counseling, but where is the step on when do you need a therapist, and also other stuff. And then of course there will be a second part where we will also work with other human rights organizations who work on asylum seekers and migration law and stuff like that. So this is really what is our goal, to really provide a comprehensive knowledge, and also to know and also to give important knowledge on what is important for a lawyer to know on intersex issues, what is important for people working with intersex asylum seekers if an intersex person needs to go to a doctor. All this information is really important, and a lot of it is in the toolkit, but of course we will also do workshops. And of course, there is always the challenge of people who are not speaking English and who are not able to speak another European language. So first of all, hopefully, and now I say something what I don't know, maybe Dan can say something afterwards to it. So hopefully we will be able to translate this cool toolkit also in other languages, so that a lot of more people can read it and can understand it. But there is also where Irene Kutsenko and I worked together, before we shared this toolkit or before we worked further on this toolkit, and then Irene finished the flyer. So we also have an intersex asylum seeker and refugee flyer where few informations on it. Of course, it's just a flyer. It's not 59 pages. What will be easier to translate in more languages. Thank you, Irene. Yeah, so these are the ideas behind it. Yeah, so it's really it is important for us not just to give out this toolkit, because that's not where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the basis, and there I want to bring it back.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, talk about the translations. So let me just jump in. OII is committed to translate the toolkit into as many different languages as we can possibly do. It will depend on funding. But if you look at our website, you will see that this is a common pattern with OII Europe. We've been translating all our material in dozens of languages so far. We've already started with translating the flyer. And we will do the same with the toolkit, step by step. Again, it's a huge document, but clearly we want to make it accessible to intersex organizations in different countries. We want to make it accessible to professionals in different countries, and we wanted to make it accessible to intersex asylum seekers and refugees. So we'll also, of course, cover languages that are not necessarily considered official languages in Europe.
There are two more questions that I am going to answer from the Q&A, but Artem, I see you have your hand up if you want to jump in. Please do.
Да, я хотел только сказать, что нужно также помнить, что OII — это организация, которая включает в себя достаточно много организаций в Европе, и если их сотрудники прочитают Toolkit и найдут способ донести до беженцев эту информацию, это уже будет очень хорошо, как, например, случилось в моем случае, но Toolkit еще не было, да, то есть я с французским языком и с русским языком достаточно нормально адаптировался и нашел друзей, в том числе в интерсекс-сообществе, и все административные процедуры прошел успешно.
То есть и тебе помогали местные тоже?
Да, конечно.
I also just wanted to remind everyone that OII Europe is a regional umbrella organization which includes a lot of members around Europe, and that if just other member organizations of OII Europe will read this toolkit and will have all the information from it available to share with the asylum seekers, intersex asylum seekers and refugees in their region, it already will be very helpful. And it definitely was very helpful for me when I was able to, just with my Russian and French languages, to connect to local intersex people who have supported me and with whom I found great friends.
Спасибо за перевод.
Тебе
Thank
спасибо.
you so much, Artem and Irene, for translating. We have a question in the chat from Yasin on how the involvement of Black, Indigenous, people of color, asylum seekers and refugees was guaranteed in the writing and proofreading process of the toolkit. And then also what steps OII Europe will be taking to ensure that we work with organizations in the future to enhance the participation of Black, Indigenous people of color, or intersex Black, Indigenous people of color. So I'd like to say that for confidentiality reasons, I can't tell you exactly which countries we worked with, because as you may or may not know, there aren't that many intersex activists that are out in some countries, and so I'd be maybe outing people who want to remain anonymous. But I can assure you that in the interview process, when Luan and I first started on this toolkit, we reached out to people from North Africa, we reached out to people from the Middle East, and we did our best to try and, of course, not just remain at EU level and to not just make sure that white perspectives were centered. But I thank you for bringing that up because it's obviously really important. And as Luan already mentioned in a little bit in answering question 1, we will really try and, now that we've launched the toolkit, to continue working with organizations who have a more intersectional perspective, who work on the topic of migration and asylum. This is something that at OII Europe we are actively thinking about and making sure that we reach out to members of the community that have an intersectional experience. So I hope that answers a little bit your question that you had, Yasin. And then we had a question from Damino on what opportunities exist for intersex people to obtain asylum, if there are any new agreements or like progress that has been made, and if we can hope for an improvement in more intersex people being granted asylum in the EU. I think that's a very complicated question, but at least from my side, I can say that unfortunately, it still remains up to member states to take the final decision. So that's why this work that we do with the EUAA and in general, just having written this toolkit and continuing to raise awareness is our key priority, because in the end, organizations that work to support refugees and asylum seekers unfortunately won't have the final say. But that's why our awareness raising work, that's why our hopefully even more collaborations in the future with organizations that work to support refugees, that work to prepare them for their interviews, will hopefully improve the situation. Of course, as Pertl also mentioned, we are at a very specific time right now in regards to EU legislation, in regards to migration. Of course, we're also in a political moment that's not the easiest. So we have to remain, of course, sober to the reality, but of course, we work to try and improve the situation, and hopefully also the other awareness raising activities that OII Europe does, not just on the topic of migration and asylum, help to raise awareness in general of the situation. We have 2 more questions in the Q&A. We have somebody saying thank you so much. And then we have Nua saying it would be helpful to know about the next steps and tools we're looking to develop for intersex and trans asylum seekers. I'm not sure who is best placed to answer this. All I can say is that we have, like Luan mentioned, Luan is our consultant on our Intersex Refugees and Asylum Seekers program, specifically with the outbreak of war in the Ukraine, also with the help of Irene, we've been supporting intersex people there. And so slowly but surely, OII Europe is trying to build our capacity to respond to help requests that come our way, to support intersex refugees and asylum seekers. At the same time, we are a very small team and we are unfortunately strained by capacity limits. So that's why we're hoping to, now that the toolkit is launched, improve our collaboration with organizations that have a much wider reach, that have more human resources, and that have been working on this topic for years. So obviously have a very specific expertise, but may not know that much about intersex refugees and asylum seekers. So definitely, I think we'll be hoping to strengthen those relationships. I don't know if Luan or Dan or anyone wants to add, or if anyone has more questions.
Yeah, maybe to add, like, as I said before, so like, of course, we want to give workshops with this toolkit for other organizations. This is what I said before. And so we like and now I need to think, but maybe I need to discuss that later with Dan. But so I was able to get a little bit of funding from Astraea, one of from the Intersex Human Rights Fund, where I'm able to travel to other countries to, like, as I said, to give workshops for this toolkit to support other organizations and to work on their knowledge and things like that. And with this funding for the travel costs, we are also able to, like that Jana and I can do that together. What is really important, because we have written it together, and Jana has a much bigger knowledge on the law side than me. So this is the idea, and yeah, we definitely want to work further on that.
I don't have much to add because I mean we've sort of like at the end of the first step and now in the planning mode. So we will definitely continue our work. And we will also let all of you know what the next steps are once we have decided on the specific ones.
If anyone has any last questions, we have time for one or two more. And if not, if you hadn't seen, we have posted the link to the OII Europe website posting where you can now access and download the toolkit, which is really very exciting. But if we don't have any more questions, then I just once again like to thank all of our panelists. I'd like to thank Magda for moderating. And I'd also like to thank the people that, want to remain anonymous, but that have been really so instrumental in the writing of this toolkit, and that Luan and I could not have achieved without this, without your stories and without your willingness to share, like Luan has already said. But I just, I'd like to end with that. And yes, please do reach out to us if you have any questions or comments. We'd really love to hear from you. And thank you everybody for making time to join us.
Yes, thank you also from my side. And yeah, I'm wishing everybody a lovely evening.
Thank you, everybody.